Hit record. Here she is. Welcome everybody to the Tools for Empowering Teams. We are on session 7 of 8. So, next week will be our last session together. Um, Go ahead, Matt. And just a reminder that funding for this series was made possible through a grant with SAMHSA, and that the views expressed today do not necessarily reflect the views of the Health and Human Services. Always, if we want addiction destigmatized, we need a language that's unified. The words we use matter, and we never want to describe people as their disease, their diagnosis, or their history. We want to talk about people as people first. This is our pathway to technical assistance. So if you have specific needs, whether you're a member of the peer workforce, a peer supervisor, you run a recovery community center or a recovery community organization, you're thinking about integrating peers, we have people at the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence that can help. And just some housekeeping notes. When you're not speaking, please keep your line muted. But we do invite you to come off mute. And for those of you that have engaged in these sessions, we love it when you come off and share your examples and your lived experience about how these tools might work for you. During the presentation, you can always feel free to submit comments or questions into the chat, and I'll watch out for those. And Matt does a good job with that as well. And then at the end of the session next week, we'll just have a short evaluation that we'll send out by email for you all to take and tell us how if you've enjoyed these series, and that feedback goes directly to SAMHSA, so that encourages them to keep things like the Peer Center of Excellence funded in existence. And I think this is where I hand it over to Matt.
Yes. Thank you, Chris. Appreciate that. Thank you to all of you for being here. Thank you, Cindy, as well. And so we'll keep talking about some tools as we have been. I did want to take a moment as kind of remind us of our frame, our context for what we're doing in these parts of our series. Now we're in this third part of planning, knowing your plan and charting the course. We've talked about a couple of tools. We're going to talk about 2x2 matrix. Probably save the Gantt chart for next time, I think. We'll see how our discussion goes. What I do want to just kind of come back to is the decision balance, which we talked about last time, and see if anyone has any further reflections or thoughts, or if you've had a chance to try to do one. One of the things I think that's helpful to remember with these tools, sometimes when I'm talking about the tools with folks, they'll say, well, yeah, I kind of already do that stuff. And what I think they're saying to me is they do it informally and they do it internally, right? Like most of us do some version of pros and cons thinking related to decisions, right? Most everybody says, oh, what's the upside? What's the downside? What's the advantages, disadvantages? That's just sort of normal, natural decision making. We all do that. The thing that I think is important when we think about structured and more formalized use of tools is that that's the way that the team gets to work together. It's really hard for us to have strong dialogue about the issue or the tool or the decision making, or in this case, that decision balance, unless we formalize it and give it a visual representation and let everybody see it together and make our lists and put our lists on a on a table or on some sort of a board so that people can see them. So that's where we really get a team process, a team dialogue. So I think that's important as we think about any and all of these tools. If you find yourself saying, well, I don't really need that tool because I already do that, that's how I think about this stuff, then ask yourself the next question: is the way that you think about it effectively communicated to your team so that they can think about it with you? If there's more than just you trying to explore an idea, are you being inclusive? And the structure of a tool really is very helpful to inclusion. Sometimes that's a piece that can get missed when we're thinking about this stuff, particularly if it feels like the tool might be a little bit a little bit of extra work if you're already kind of thinking about it that way. So the return on investment of the tool is to be able to share it and pull the team together, align the team with some common structures to be able to work together. I think the nominal group technique brainstorming is a really good example. If you follow those structures, you maximize the team's capacity to work together and to kind of come together to explore the ideas as a unit, as a collective. Anybody have any thoughts about that decision balance that we did last time or any of our other tools and how you might be using tools or how you might be engaging with your team members as we've been talking about these things? Anybody have anything they'd like to share or any questions about any of that stuff so far? Or what's the last thing you did with your team members where you actually had some structured process that you did together? Whatever, even if it's not one of our tools that we've been talking about. That's, I think, interesting. What's the last thing you did with your team where you had a process that you used together to kind of try to do something? Anybody have something they'd like to share in that category? And I bet you use them when you don't even know you're using them, when you are having meetings. Like, how do you keep track of what you're talking about when you have a meeting with your team? Do you use some sort of a tool to structure things? Diana's talking about a personal pros and cons list over the last weekend, and it was very helpful. Yeah, a lot of people use them for any number of different decisions. I find them to be really helpful. I do that a lot myself. I am a visual person. I don't like to just let the ideas rattle around in my head, which is what they seem to do. I don't seem to ever capture them if they're just in my head. I need to see them visually. I need to make categories. I'm often taking a piece of paper and dividing it into sections, and we'll be talking about that with our 2x2 matrix and saying what goes in this part, what goes in that part. Are these, and then drawing arrows between things like this is related to that, because that's how I get clarity. That's really the only way I can get clarity. Some people seem to be able to do that internally without visualizing it. I'm not one of those people. I find that the visualization is really important. Thanks for sharing that. Anybody else have any thoughts about using tools? Rhonda said, I'm here to get some tools. Just beginning. Yeah, for sure. And hopefully these tools that we're sharing are helpful to you. All right, I want to talk about this 2x2 matrix. And as you recall, when we were talking about the nominal group technique, brainstorming, and we had that part of the nominal group technique where we said, okay, now it's time to vote on the items that are on our list. And then sometimes people will say, well, what should I vote for? Well, vote for the best ideas. Well, what do you mean best ideas? So then we sometimes say, well, how much impact will it have and how easy is it to do? And then we think of that as a 2x2, a 2x2 matrix. And so that's what I want to talk about today is this 2x2 matrix. So we'll first use this reference point from that nominal group technique, and then I'll have a couple of other examples that I think will be helpful. So we'll try to decide which idea we should do. So we have a 2x2 matrix, and we have two different issues that are on this matrix. One is how easy is it to do? So across the bottom, you see the two-sided arrow. On the one side is easy, and on the other side it's difficult. And then the other axis here is up and down on the left, which is the impact. How much impact will it have? So as you recall, this is our way to analyze two variables and to consider a high and a low category in those two variables. So the upper left category, the upper left box where I have the smiley face and the yes, it is doing something that has a high impact. It's on the high side of that axis, and it's easy to do. At the bottom, it's either easy or difficult. So this one is high impact and easy to do. And that one is a winner, right? Things that are going to have a high impact and are easy to do are the things that we want to do. And then you notice down in the lower right, something that is easy or difficult. Okay, it's difficult. It's on the right-hand side. And if we look over to the other axis, we see that it's on the low impact versus high impact. So that means that it has a low impact and it's difficult to do. So something that's difficult to do, takes a lot of time and energy, and doesn't have very much impact, has a low impact, we should not do that. That's not going to be a good return on our investment. We want to do the things that are easy with a high impact, and we don't want to do the things that are difficult with a low impact. So this is a good example of this 2x2. Now I'm curious, and I would love to hear people say something out loud. When you hear me talk through this 2x2, does this seem like, oh yeah, that's cool. That's a good way to think about it? Or do you have some version of the following thought, like, I don't know, this isn't really helpful to me, and I don't really see it that way, and I'm not quite sure how this is working. What are your thoughts when I share this 2x2 with you as a way of thinking about two ideas related to one particular decision? And I'm going to share some examples in a minute that I think will help to clarify it, but I just want to get a check and see what people see or what they think as we're starting to think about this 2x2 matrix. What are your reactions to it?
So I like it. And I think that I've been using something similar without realizing it. We try to go for a lot of grants, but because there's so many grants and there's only me writing grants, I have to look at um, the value of the grant versus the work I'm going to put into writing it
Yes.
versus how much is it going to add to our programming,
Mhm.
um, that kind of thing, so that I can kind of decide what grants I'm going to go for.
Yeah, absolutely. So you could use a version of this with that, which might be how much time will it take? Some applications are bigger, some are smaller. And how likely are we to get the money? Might be the other one. Or the other one might be how much money is it? If it's a ton of time for a very little amount of money, okay. If it's not so much time for a lot of money, okay, all right, this is better. So those two, or that other way of thinking about it, how much time, what are our chances? I think we have really good odds on this one. Oh, this one is super competitive and it's a lot of time. I don't know. Oh, well, maybe it's not that much time and it's super competitive. Okay, that might be more manageable because I don't have to invest a ton of time in it. Even though it's really competitive, it'll be hard to get it, but it's okay because it's not as much time. So these are good examples of doing this 2x2 and analyzing based on those two variables, high, low in either category. Now you could make this more complicated. Instead of high, low, you could have high, medium, and low, and it could be a 3x3 or a 10x10 if it's a 10-point scale. Those are overly complicated, and I'm not a big fan of doing it that way. I think it's just good to do simple high, low on both, and kind of think about it in simple terms. So, Stacy, those are really good examples. Thank you for sharing that. What are other people thinking as you see this? Are there other ways that you're considering how this might fit for what you do? I have a couple of examples that I want to share with you as ways to keep thinking about this. And then I might ask you, as I'm doing this, start thinking about things that you need to make decisions on currently when you're trying to decide what to do or how to move forward. So let's take a look at a couple of examples. So first example, when you're hiring someone and there's two variables, one is their written skills and one is their social skills, right? So how are they in terms of documenting and recording, tracking what they're doing, and how are they in terms of their interpersonal social skills? Okay, so those are two things to consider. So we can put these on the X and on the Y. So let's think about this. So let's think about somebody in that bottom right quadrant. So we'll have the first variable be the X and the second one be the Y. So written skills, they have high written skills, low social skills. Now, we're saying these things in really simple terms. Human beings are far more complicated than what we're doing here, obviously. We're just using kind of simple examples, which don't maybe fully, they don't really respect the complexity of people. I know that that's true. It's just a simple way of framing it. So in this case, we have someone who has really good, um, is high on the written skills, but really interpersonally maybe doesn't have a lot of experience. It's maybe a kind of reserved, maybe is a little bit withdrawn and might struggle with some of those skills, hasn't had a chance to develop those. Okay. And then think about someone who on the other end of the spectrum might have low written skills, but really high social, interactive, interpersonal skills, right? So that's the person who's great with people, but oh, documentation, not so good. They have a hard time doing that on time, a hard time doing it at the level that we want them to. Um, and then we'll think of a third category, which is a person who has high level written skills and high level interpersonal skills. So that's sort of an obvious one. That's who we want, right? We want someone who is strong, particularly if the job requires a lot of documentation, right? Um, that's an important factor. And so if we can get someone who has great interpersonal skills and great written language skills, then we want the high in both categories for that job that we're trying to hire for. So this could be a way that we could review our candidates to think about the big categories of skill that we need. I'll give you a second example. Let's say we have certain tools that we use to engage the people we're serving. And let's say we want those tools to be both comprehensive and accessible. Comprehensive, they cover everything that needs to be covered. Accessible, they're comfortable and easy for the person we're supporting to use. So think about this in this first category. Are they comprehensive? Yes, it's a very comprehensive tool. It is, 17 pages long with tons and tons of information and tons of questions. However, it's written and structured in a way that gives it a lower score when it comes to accessibility. It's really long and kind of complicated. So it's kind of intimidating to people. Some of you may have experienced uh, a tool like that, like an assessment tool or something like that. Um, Another alternative here would be over here on the upper left, where we have one that is low in terms of its comprehensiveness. It's much simpler. Um, and it's high then in terms of its accessibility. It's really short and sweet and simple. It doesn't include all of the information, and it's really accessible for people and easy for them to fill out. So in this case, which direction would you want to go? Do you want to go with one that is accessible and easy to fill out and people are comfortable with, which doesn't gather as much information? Or do you want to go with the one that's more complicated, has all the information, but is more challenging for people to fill out? What's your opinion? What do you think?
I would vote the less challenging one.
So Diana would go with that one in the upper left and say, we're willing to sacrifice the details and all that extra information. We're saying that's not as important as it being accessible and comfortable and easy for the person to use. So that's the one that we want to use. Yeah. Now, could someone make a case for the other one? Could someone make a case for the other one and say, well, there's some missing things that are really important and we have to gather them and we can find ways to support people in doing the more complicated one, even though it's not as accessible because we need to gather that extra stuff. Depending on the circumstances, this would be a one where someone could, maybe make a case in the other direction. But I hear Diana placing a high value on the engagement and the relationship building on the front end, which makes good sense to me too. And she might argue you can pick up some of that other information as you go. Maybe you don't need it all right away. And the most important thing is to make sure that people don't feel uncomfortable, which I tend to agree with. Okay, so here's one more. Let's say you want to get a new office. You need to move your office and you have two variables that you're considering, which are the most two common variables usually when people think about an office. How much does it cost, and what's the quality of the location? So give me a couple of factors. When I say quality of location, what would that mean to you? If a location is of high quality, what does that mean in terms of an office? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's accessible, has public transportation
Yep,
for staff. It's a safe environment,
yep,
uh,
yeah.
and there's enough space to withhold and support a growing organization.
Okay, yeah, those are several biggies, right? Those are good quality indicators of a quality location. Anything else anyone would add to that list of factors that we would use to define quality? I think Denise hit the big ones. Those are big categories. Is it accessible in terms of transportation? Is it safe? And is it one that can grow? Does it have the space that you need? There might be something about the nature of the building, the physical building itself, is it in good repair? Is it attractive? Does it feel, comfortable for people in that way? So those are, I think, what we're talking about when we say quality. So we know that cost and quality obviously are, going to impact each other. So let's think about how this might lay out on the grid. So we go look at one office. Its location. If we think about the cost, we'll start with the cost as the first variable and the location is the second variable. So cost is the X. So the cost is low. It does not cost much money. The reason it doesn't cost so much money, if we go to the Y, is that the quality is also low, right? So this is you get what you pay for. This location is not good. It's not on a bus route. It's in a not so comfortable, safe environment. And for people walking outside, it's not well lit, and maybe the building's in kind of bad repair. There's some other things like that, right? So there's things that we don't like about it, and the price is low. Okay, so we like the price, we don't like the quality. So let's look over in this lower right box. So we have a space where the cost is high, right? Again, on the X, the previous one had a high cost, had a low cost. This one has a high cost, and the location quality is low. Let's say it's right next door to the other one. So far, which one do we like better? Well, this one's giving me the same environment, but it's more money. Why would I want that, right? I would go with the first one instead of the second one, using these two variables, right? If it's going to be low quality, I want low cost. I'm not going to buy low quality and low cost. That doesn't make sense, right? I'm not doing that one. So then the third one, here's the third one, where we have we have low cost and high quality. Interesting. So we just happened to find a really good deal of low cost and high quality. We're definitely going for that one, right? It's a low cost. The rent is manageable, and it's got some of those quality features that Denise was just describing. It's safe. It's on a bus line. It's got good parking. It's in a nice environment. The building is in pretty good shape. Maybe there's some reason why it's not very expensive. I'm not sure what that reason could be, but that would be the one that we would go for. So you see this as a way to do this kind of 2x2 matrix to think about a couple of variables. Now, as I was saying at the beginning, the idea here is you could do this in your head. There's nothing that I said out loud that you couldn't be doing in your head. And you probably do as you make decisions all the time, every day. The value of using the matrix is that we can formalize it and we can then talk with a team about it and consider a conversation with people as we weigh things. So we get together with the team and we go visit 3 different offices and we say, okay, how did you feel about the cost, right? We can just put the numbers on the grid. And then let's talk about the quality and let's put that on the grid and kind of put the different locations in different quadrants on the grid and then think about how we want to make a decision. So, so this is the idea. So what I would encourage you to do right now, I'm going to stop sharing this, is to just take a piece of paper and make a square in the middle of your piece of paper, and then divide your square into 4 quadrants, right? And then make that into something that looks like this, right? So 4 quadrants, and then high, low, plus and minus on each of the 2 ideas. And then we're going to think about 2 variables that we could look at with those 4 quadrants. So, and then we might need an example. You can use anything that you'd like, but let's think about a decision that somebody might be making. And as I do this, think about something that you're trying to explore, try to decide which way to go with something where we can look at a couple of variables. Does anyone have anything that's coming to mind in terms of something you're trying to sort out that you and or your team is trying to think about, a choice that you might be trying to make? That we could plug into this simple grid that you have in front of you. Anybody have a decision? Anybody trying to make a decision about resources to use, something to purchase, whether or not to do a certain something, or which one to buy, which one to move forward with, which person to assign to a certain activity, or to whether or not to work with, partner with a certain organization, or which organizations, anything in any of those categories, maybe. Anybody thinking about doing some, making a change in some programming or some support that you're delivering, or using a different tool or strategy? What's the newest thing that you've had to decide to do, or something recently that you had to do that was new or that you changed?
So we're discussing whether we can, if the funding comes through, whether we have the ability to expand into another county.
Mhm. Okay. Right. So if you're expanding into another county, we could do a pro con on this, right? We could do a decision balance on this, the upside and the downside to expansion into another county. Can you say a little bit more about it, Stacy? What are the kind of factors that you're considering here?
Well, of course, the funding coming through is the big one.
Right.
There's no infrastructure at all in the other county. So we would be starting essentially from the ground up,
Mhm.
which is intimidating and probably a down. We have a small staff we would have to hire if we were
Right.
going to do it. And it's going to, we already have a lot of partnerships developed in the county we're in. So
Okay.
it's going to be all new partnerships in a whole other county.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
in the new county, it would be how much, so there's a couple of variables I'm hearing. Is one is there's relationships, and maybe if we thought about it as not a full county, but different sectors within that county. Do you have relationships um, with different parties or different organizations in that county? Um, so do you have a relationship, and is there any infrastructure in that community where you could do something, like a location where you could work, right? Or where you could meet with people? So no, this is a little bit artificial because we're just sort of creating it. So one of the things we could do is we could say, let's look at the different potential partners in that county, right? And then let's kind of put them on this grid and say, do we have a relationship with that potential partner? Let's say there's 3 or 4, right? Different organizations or agencies that you might work with in that new county. Um, so do we have think of one and then tell me, do you have a relationship with it? Yes or no? Think of one right now. Give us the first initial. What's the first initial?
So the biggest one we would need is a relationship with the prison.
Okay, so let's call it the prison. So do you have a relationship with them now?
No,
Okay. Do they have infrastructure in terms of the resources to be able to engage with you, to be able to allow you to do stuff with them?
they do, yes, because they do have other folks that they work with.
Okay. All right. So what I'm doing here, you see my P that I put up in this box? Because we're high on the location in terms of the infrastructure. Infrastructure. Of course, you won't be able to read this because it's too sloppy. And so it's high on infrastructure. It is low on relationship. So that's why it's in that upper left quadrant. So now think about another partner. Who's a second partner who you might do something with?
The probation office.
All right. Do you have a relationship with probation?
Not in that county, no.
Okay.
We're counting on our county that we're already working with, that they will help us, kind of develop those relationships.
Okay. Yeah. So the relationship might not be super critical because you can develop it. Do they have infrastructure? Is it as strong as the prison's infrastructure?
I would say no.
No, so it's less so. So probation is in a different quadrant. We see that probation was going to be challenging on both. Prison is challenging on only one. Probation is low on both. So now we see that they're going to be more work because one, we have to build a relationship. Two, there's really no infrastructure there because they're not really doing this stuff. So we have to do trailblazing with them. Can you give me one more? Is there a third potential party with whom you could work?
The single county authority.
Okay. Okay, so the SCA is going to be, where are you at with relationship to them?
So we know someone that has a great relationship with them.
So it's better than these other, you have a little more connectivity there.
Well, better than probation, at least.
Okay, all right. What about as it relates to the infrastructure for working with you? Do they have it?
That I'm not sure of yet.
Okay, all right. So that's a question mark whether or not they have it. So I'm going to sort of put them in a bit of a spot across the boundaries, right? So I sort of put them in the middle there because they're a little bit fuzzy.
Right.
But if we look at across these three, we'll see that we have a little bit more opportunity with that single county authority, given the relationship is a little bit more advanced. And it's a question mark as to whether or not it's high or low in terms of the infrastructure that they have. As you get more knowledge, you might then take that single county authority and move it up or down based on the information that you get. And then you could, if there's any other partners, you could put them on here, and then you and your team could say, this one's hard work. This one's kind of hard work. This one's a little easier. That doesn't mean that we're saying we won't work with them and we will work with the other one, but it might mean that we would say, we need to put more energy and time into this one because it'll require more of our resource. This one will be easier. So as we balance the way we approach them, let's get started soon and with significant effort with the one where it's going to be the most challenging. It's critical and important, but as we put it on this grid, we start to see that they're not all the same. Most of the time when people do planning, they sort of put all the key organizations they need to work with on a list and say, let's go, there's 4 of them, let's go. Well, wait a minute, we really need to be more intentional about this. Some of them have more intense needs in terms of relationship building. Some of them have more or less infrastructure. Those are the 2 most important variables for us here. So we need to do planning based upon something like this. right? So we have a little more clarity. As we're talking through that, Stacy, how is it sitting with you as an idea? How does this grid is it helpful, or what's your sense of this?
I do think it's helpful because it's helping me to understand who we should start with. So I feel like we should start talks with the prison because they
Yeah.
are the easiest. And then if they
Yeah.
fall in line, that may influence probation and the SCA.
Yeah, so low hanging fruit. This grid tells us that they have more infrastructure, even though we don't have relationships. We might be able to sort of work on that, but they're already doing this stuff. So easier to get rolling. Then we build momentum with them. That kind of creates a domino effect with the others.
Yes.
And that seems like a really good strategy, which emerges from looking at this 2x2 grid.
Yes.
I like that a lot. This is a great example. Thank you for sharing it, Stacy. I appreciate
You're
that.
welcome.
So everybody hopefully can kind of see this. You sort of take the two primary considerations and then put them on the two sides of this 2x2 matrix. Now, some people will say to me, well, there's not only just two things, there's like 4 or 5 things, which is absolutely true. And we can't draw a 5x5 matrix unless we're doing, multi-dimensional drawings here. Um, so we're really just kind of thinking of the two primary considerations, and we're just thinking of it in high and low to keep it simple. And it's not the end all, it's just a way to get started thinking about how these things might interact. Because you might draw this and then say, well, there is this third thing. So you might take your favored approach based off of this 2x2 and then say, well, what about adding in this third idea? How does that impact how I see this? It's a way to just be kind of focused and mindful so that you don't mush all the ideas together and you keep them clear in a matrix format. Anybody have any questions or thoughts about this? How does it sit with you as an idea?
I really like the idea and the fact that we can get this out and put it on paper to really walk through it, because there are some
Yeah.
things that we just can't account for. And as we do walk through it, we'll probably identify yet another opportunity that could be easier with a
Yeah.
higher impact. So this is
Yeah.
great. Thank you.
Yeah. So it does stimulate some thinking
Hmm.
while you're considering the ideas, Denise. I agree.
Hmm.
And it's just, okay, where does this one fit? Where does this one fit? Oh, well, that
Yeah.
makes me think about another possibility. So, and
Yeah.
hopefully that's what happens, which is
I
good.
think for me, it feels like just a difficult moment at the very beginning, trying to identify those two primary
Yeah.
sort of questions that we need to ask there, and begin to ask that first question. Well, I think after that first question, we can start to place them in boxes, which makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Denise.
Hmm.
I think you're right. That setting it up is usually the most challenging part. Once you have it set up, it kind of does itself. But the setup part is a little challenging. So you can ask yourself the question, okay, here's something we're trying to do. What are the most important considerations? Here's something I want I need a new office. What are the most important considerations? We need to seek out another funding. What are the most important considerations? Well, the amount of money, how much work we have to do to get it. That might be it. Or the office, we did the office version. So what are the two most important considerations for us? Might be the question. When we think about moving forward, what are the two things we need to pay attention to that are most critical as we do this? Um, and it's not always really obvious. So, and when it's just really not at all obvious and you can't get there with it, then maybe it's not a 2x2 matrix opportunity, This is one tool that you can use under some circumstances. And I think the most important part about these tools is to recognize where they can be used and recognize where they don't fit, because force fitting a tool into a circumstance where it really doesn't fit can create confusion, right? If we were trying to, some folks I see will get really dedicated to a certain tool and they'll use it with every thing that they try to plan. Most tools don't have that level of flexibility, right? It's better to have maybe a handful of things that you can use. And if one's not quite working, then you can switch to one of the other ones. And that's always where I'm always really interested in having conversations with people if they're trying to figure out how to use different sorts of planning tools and they're getting a little hung up with it. Please always, if you have that happen, just shoot me an email and we can chat about it and consider how you might move forward with that tool or with a different tool. So that might be a good place for us to wrap up for today. I want to encourage all of you to take that little grid that hopefully you just sketched on a piece of paper and apply it to something. Think about how you might use that 2x2 as a way of doing some analysis and considering the high and the low, and hopefully that will make something feel a little clearer than it does now. Chris, any thoughts, or anyone else, any comments or questions before we wrap up for today?
If there's no questions, thank you all for joining us. I love these tools. I love math too that you pointed out. What's great about having a toolkit is that you don't just have one tool. And I can say I've been guilty of trying to use the wrong tool on the wrong project, and we live and learn, and there's no shame in that, but also just that's why we have a toolbox full of all these different tools, because it's pretty cool, because you can take something out and examine it and say, does this fit? I'll give it a try, and if not, oh, let's try the next one. And we're all used to that working in recovery spaces. That's what we help people do every day. Try things out. Is it a good fit? Yes, no. If not, scrap it. Don't think too much about it.
Absolutely. Everyone's heard the old adage, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So if you have one tool, you try to use it on everything, and you probably will end up smashing some stuff with that hammer. You try to use it on the wrong stuff. That said, we don't need 700 tools, right? Unless you're doing really detailed certain kinds of stuff. Mostly we just need a handful of simple tools that cover, and the things we've been talking about, I think, can do that. So looks like Denise had a comment.
And I think it's the same exact comment that April has in the chat. And that is, do we have a way to access the tools after the class? Like just sort of a list of them that we can jump online and grab.
We have just a little workbook that Matt and I put together, very informal. And I'm looking for it on my computer right now.
Yeah.
And I'll post it into the chat, and then I'll email it out to folks as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so then you can kind of review the tools that we've been talking about and try them. And as I said, feel free to get in touch if there's a question, if you're trying one. I love to have those conversations, so I would welcome that if you would like to talk about one if you're trying to use it. All right. I think we're probably good then. Encourage you to try this one, as with all the others that we've been talking about. Try them, and we'll get back together for our final meeting next time. Okay.
Thank you, everybody. Anybody that wants to hang on, I don't know why I can't find this toolkit, but
okay.
Otherwise,
Well,
I'll email it out to everyone.
Yeah, we can just push it out to everybody. That's fine. I hate looking for stuff while I'm live in a
I know.
meeting.
It's such pressure.
I can never find anything, and as soon as I get off, oh, there it is.
There it is. Yeah.
I totally get that.
Yeah,
All right.
email it out to everybody. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Be well. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.